Okay, we look like we're good to go. Hi, it's Mike, VA3 Mike Whiskey. And I have a chat for people who may not be familiar with how powerful the Ethernet or the LAN is in your Hamshack and how we can start to really leverage it to communicate with external hardware like radios and switches and antenna controllers, etc. And that's coming up shortly in this presentation. Welcome back to the QSO Today Expo. Let's talk about Ethernet in the Hamshack and how it can start to replace some of the older RS232 technology. So, little groundwork here. What is Ethernet? Well, Ethernet is our local area network, our Wi-Fi, the internet. It's all carried to us via the Ethernet. And that's how we know it today, and depending where you live, you may consider this an essential service. We do so much with Ethernet today. We generally watch a lot of television or movies or video. Our iPhones or Android phones all connect to each other and even make phone calls over the Ethernet or the internet. So pretty big deal. So, okay, what's different? What's a serial port? Well, in the amateur radio world, we know it as an RS232 port, or a CAT port, or a COM port. And in the Windows world, each one has a unique number. It can be 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 255. In the Linux or the Mac world, which are very similar, they have funny numbers. They look like a file name if you look closely, but it can generally be something like /dev/ something or other. And each one of those names is unique, meaning they define a different physical serial port, these things that I'm sure we've all used and had in our computers and plugged in and hanging off from one to many. And that's it's generally got a 9-pin connector on it, but in the earlier days of the internet they had 25-pin connectors, and then we had adapters from 9 to 25, and then we had null modem adapters. What the heck's that all about? Or why do I care? Well, in order to make it work, you might need to care. So why do we use serial ports? Well, they're the way we talk to our hardware devices from our computers. And they're really a one-to-one relationship. One serial port, one device. So you've got one computer communicating to many devices. So the radio will connect to our computer by a serial port. We call it a CAT port or something like that, but they're all the same. And it might be just a USB cable, but it's emulating the same thing. Our rotator might do the same thing. If you have antenna switches or bandpass filters, or an antenna like a stepper or an opti-beam, or even some mag loop antennas, will want frequency information from the radio. And you can see where this is going. Where do I get my frequency information for my antenna if my logging program also wants it? Well, there's ways to do it, but it's complicated. Watt meters, many of them communicate with your computer via a serial port. It's pretty common. Sometimes in logging programs like N1MM, we use them for push-to-talk keying to put the radio into transmit for our voice keyer, or frequency shift keying for our TTY, which is a special type of keying if you're not familiar with it. And they actually really don't scale very well. In fact, we find them somewhat restrictive. Because, as I said earlier, you have one serial port to one piece of hardware device. And as you start to add things to this customly built computer you have, it'll have maybe 8 serial ports, as you see with this device here. This would probably connect to your computer via a USB cable, have some specialized software in it, so that you can access all of these serial ports, these 9-pin connectors, for hooking up a radio, a rotator, a watt meter, etc. And it's really cool when it all works. And it does, but you get the idea. And as I mentioned, sometimes you need null modem adapters because it takes a minimum, generally, of 3 wires to communicate with a piece of remote hardware. Or by remote, I mean hardware that's not part of your computer. And it's just really old technology. And if you're setting up a station like an SO2R station, that's a single operator 2 radio station where you've got 2 radios going at the same time and 2 amplifiers and stuff, it's a lot of work, and it starts to really get complicated. As an example, I found this on a reflector about a month ago, and it was a gentleman trying to get 2 Kenwood radios to interface with an Elecraft amplifier, all of which use serial ports. And he wanted the radios to track each other and a whole bunch of different things. And to be honest, you can see as you read through this, there's some confusion regarding baud rate. Well, do I really care? Well, you do, because they all need to match. And commands that are sent back and forth. And this is how we've done it since probably the late 90s, when we started to produce radios. The ICOM Kenwood Yaesu, started to produce radios with serial port interfaces on them. And that was really cool back then. But wow, we've gone so much bigger, where we need more versatility, and we need it to scale. And there was like 10 or 20 emails that went on way past this. So it was quite funny. Actually, it wasn't funny, but it was very entertaining and enlightening, and to show you where the hobby is today and why we need to get past this, and why we need new radios to have more Ethernet control. So what's wrong with it? Well, it was developed a long time ago, back in the 60s. And as I've mentioned before, it's a one-to-one relationship. One piece of hardware to one communications port. And often only one program to that communication port. There's ways around it with VSP splitters and stuff, where the program, like your logging program, had to be able to communicate with many different serial ports. N1MM does this very well. Other logging programs do it as well, N1M being a contest logging program. It's more wires in your Hamshack. Well, that can result in more RFI issues. It can radiate noise, affecting your ability to hear, but also can be RF getting back into the computer, causing keyboard lockups and really strange things. And this is not just related to, I've seen people say, oh, my SWR is great, but I have RFI issues. Well, probably because if your SWR is good and your antenna is good, you're radiating more RF. And if you're radiating more RF, you could be overloading cables in your Hamshack, because every cable is actually an antenna. One of the other cool things that happen is, well, how many times have you taken a cable like this, plugged it in, and it works great, and then month or two, week or two later, you go to move your computer, you unplug everything or whatever, you plug it back in, and on the Windows world, what was, COM2 is now COM22 or some unique number, and now your logging program doesn't work. So this is why we want to start getting away from RS232 as the technology we use to communicate with our external devices. So this is why also we want to look at a LAN or Ethernet-based environment. A lot less RFI issues. Ethernet cables are twisted pairs, so they're balanced. You don't need custom cables to connect, say, a watt meter to your computer. You just connect it to, something like your router or a switch, which, looks like this. Bunch of network cables in the back. And, this is an 8-port switch by Netgear. Very popular. I like looking for these in metal cases. These work really well. And don't always get the cheapest one. While they all work, they all don't work as well as others. So good quality network switch. I look for the sort of the home business models or the prosumer models. And I often put, by the way, because this has a switching power supply on them, you can tell switching power supplies are really light. I tend to put chokes on them. This one I haven't done yet, but mix 31 or mix 43 chokes. And as you get into hardware devices that are LAN based, the IP address is sort of a set once and forget for the most part. And there's some stuff you do have to be aware of, but it's not complicated. And why you may have learned about radio and antennas and stuff, time to take the time to learn a little bit about your home network. I guarantee you can find videos on YouTube that describe how home networks and TCP IP work, and within 20 minutes you'll understand things like the addressing. And here's a very simple network on my screen. You'll see this is 192.168.0. Those in your network and any home network pretty much guarantee that these first 3 digits, this octet, will always be the same. And you want to make sure you keep them the same, because that is called a subnet, and everything on the same subnet generally can hear every other device on the subnet. And not to go down a rat hole in this conversation or this presentation, but you want to be on the same subnet. And if you want to know more about subnets and meshes and range extenders and other cool stuff that you can make your network work better, you can look on YouTube, and we even have a few on the FlexRadio videos channel, LAN in the Hamshack, and I have a link to that at the end of this presentation. And like I said, it's very simple to learn. Learn something new. Why not? And not only that, when your Netflix doesn't work, if you know a little bit about subnets and DNSs, you'll be able to diagnose why it's maybe not working so well, and your kids will be happier. So it's time to get rid of RS232. Now, this isn't going to happen all overnight by a long shot. In fact, it might still be around forever. But if you're looking to replace your hardware, antenna switches, or just because you're looking for a hobby to upgrade your shack infrastructure, look for items that are LAN based or Ethernet based. Certainly all Flex radios are all LAN based. Some other OEM radios are starting to have LAN or Ethernet connections, although what functionality is available there seems to be limited. In the Flex radio world, the LAN integration, everything is available from the connector on the back of the radio that goes out on your subnet. That's a term I'm going to use a little bit, which means that other devices can share information from it. And there's even other projects going on within the hemisphere that are making things communicate so much better using a LAN or Ethernet integration. And my blinders are on a bit. I fess up to that, but poke around, and there's a lot of groups where this integration is getting so much easier. In our world, and I'll show you some pictures, you've got a radio, we've got amplifiers with the Power Genius XL. The Tuner Genius XL is LAN based, although it can be controlled by other OEM radios via RS232 or CIV, which are pretty much the same thing. We have Antenna Geniuses by 403A. I'll show you a picture of mine after the presentation, or a quick tour of my setup. The Rotor Genius, also have a quick tour of that. And this is just scratching the surface, so we're getting there. But we need to scratch it more. We need more stuff. So why Ethernet? Well, it's an industry standard. It works worldwide and wirelessly. There's no distance limitations. You can now start to make your ham shack work on your picnic table in the backyard, or maybe halfway around the world. It is really easy to configure. It's just maybe something new. And it really does scale well, meaning you can make it bigger. And especially if you're doing a club station or something, this is really the way to go. And there are ways to share your information and ideas about that. So today's LAN in the Hamshack is actually a key part. And we have a video on the Flex Radio YouTube channel about LAN in the Hamshack done by Dan, N7HQ. Really good description about how it works. But normally we just use LAN for our Ethernet. But we also can share information. We can do research on new projects or antennas. We use it for our DX clusters for spots. We still call them packet spots, but they're DX spots. DX maps, if you're looking to see if 6 or 2 meter DX is open, or even 10 meter, or other bands. PSK Reporter, which is a great tool to see if, hey, am I really getting out on FT8? Is anybody copying my signal? You can usually tell by looking at PSK Reporter. And we even have a whole phone network called the Hamshack Hotline, a phone network of hams, so that You can reach out to other hams and be on. It doesn't cost anything other than a phone, and that's pretty cool for ham-to-ham calls. And you're not on the home phone network, home phone anymore. Again, just scratching the surface, but my idea is here to get you thinking about things. So, not to pick on Brian, who I know personally and his shack, but all this stuff is an amazing setup. Big integration. Actually, Brian's a big 160 operator. But we do use this information in today's Hamshack. If we click on a packet spot, the radio changes frequency. Maybe we're changing bands, so the antenna changes frequency. Maybe we've gone to 15 meters, well, the stepper's changing frequency, etc. So that's why we do all this integration and why we need to start looking away from serial ports or RS232, just to make that life a little bit easier. And sorry, Brian, not picking on you. I just thought it was a great example of a totally integrated Hamshack. And this is really a lot of work to make this run. And if you ask Brian to explain it to you, I'm sure it won't be a short conversation. Thanks, Brian. And here's another picture from VK4 Sierra November. Now, I don't know him, and I just pulled this off the internet, but this is, if you look in the left middle here, you'll see that he's got 6-7 serial ports or COM ports all integrated with something. And, this is a lot of work. So if we move forward in today's world, or sort of looks like this, the SO1R station, single operator, one radio. It shows how we have it set up today, but where we still use RS232 to communicate with an amplifier and maybe an antenna switch. Now, fortunately, in the Flex world, we can handle that for you. But if you don't use a Flex, you've got to now use a computer to drive those band changes. So it's a sort of a hybrid solution as we start to move forward and get away from that. But the Flex 6000 radios have as many CAT connectors on the back of the radio as you need. We use them through a USB device. Makes it pretty straightforward to set stuff up. So let's start over. And if we do this all with a LAN, you can actually start making it really simple and really well structured with, say, a Flex 6400 and a Maestro. You run your Smart SDR on a PC, or both, believe it or not. You can run N1MM, which communicates to the radio. And as you change bands, the radio drives the band changes to the stepper or antenna switches. And this is cool because now we're not 100% dependent on the computer to drive all that information. There was a clearinghouse before, and that was the PC. And now we can get away from the PC as being the clearinghouse for information, at least in the Flex world, and have the radio do it. So digress a little bit because we will have this hybrid phase. And while the Flex can do both parts of Flex 6000 series. These are two very similar setups. The one on the left is a full-blown SO2R station with showing just the communication of the radio, the information communication between the devices, and the same thing on the right. While on the right, all we have are 4 LAN cables and 2 RF cables between each device. I left out the PC, so that's 1 more LAN cable. It starts to get a lot cleaner and a lot simpler, and as I mentioned earlier, a lot less places for RFI injection. And maybe even RF quieter so you can hear more. I wanted to thank Jan Sierra Echo 3 X-Ray for the diagram on the left. And by the way, his diagram on the right is what he has now. He's replaced all the stuff on the left, though he uses an expert amplifier, but it's gotten so much cleaner. And I emailed him about it, and he emailed me back and said, yeah, totally a whole lot simpler. So this is what he came back and said, yeah, I should have done the diagram on the right, but I now have a 6700, the Flex knob, and an expert 1K. And here's how it looks like when you're all done. 2 cables, switch, and it's just a bigger picture of what you have already seen. Pretty simple. And easy to debug as well. Or another view of the same thing. This is actually what they call single operator 3 radio setup, and where they share all the information. Now, the key part of this are the antenna switches and a really cool module from 403A that make this share all the same antennas. And that's always been the problem in a multi faceted station is, how do you share all the antennas so everybody can get everything? And there are times that works. We have actually one club that I know of that has a very similar setup. They can actually do this remotely and even contest remotely. And in today's COVID world, because this is the middle of 2021, if you're watching this later, this has been a priority for the last year, or certainly a case of necessity being the mother of invention. So as we go forward, consider new hardware that's TCP/IP based. And if you had to redesign your station, how much stuff wouldn't you require anymore? I know when I tried to move my station over from my OEM device to the Flex stuff, there was more and more stuff I did not require. And it actually ended up on the floor and then ended up on the flea market. Node-RED is a really cool way to integrate unlike hardware into a single application that allows you to see things from just a web page, like watt meters, steppers, automation, and stuff that you can actually, and I'm going to use the word program cautiously, but integrate and configure. It's very visual, very easy to follow and understand. And we have a group, a Ham Radio group, just dedicated to Node-RED. And I have posted the link at the end of here as a reference. And Dave, WO2X, has been a great mentor to many people with Node-RED. And you can join us on Facebook. There's a remote HF operating group on Facebook. You can join us on a groups.io. And if you want some more reference, you can. There's an article coming up in the September 2021 issue of QST regarding that. And we're still growing this. We want you to share and collaborate your ideas with other people and get thinking about this. And this is why you want to jump on these social groups, or even the private or public social groups, and expand on your ideas. On the Facebook group we just started, I'm amazed at how many different ideas that have come forth on how to turn off power, how to automate their station or integrate. It's become a whole part of the hobby. Really cool. A little more detail on the 403 products. We talked earlier. We've got the 1x6 switch. Actually, that's a 1x8. And a 2x8, meaning for 2 radios, and the 403A antenna switch. The Rotor Genius, by the way, on the bottom right I like it. I'm using it. It has a flux gate compass on the boom, so it tells me where the boom's pointing all the time. I'm not dependent on where the antenna's pointed by a potentiometer setting. Other rotors do it a little better, but the high gain line are very, they have this pot that eventually wears out or becomes dirty, and if you turn your antenna, you've seen your needle going so that's really cool. This is LAN based or Ethernet based. It can control 2 different types of rotors at the same time, whether it's high gain or some DC motor like an alpha spid, which I use, or an AC motor, or even prop pitch motor. So very versatile device, and that's available from 403A. And I'm sure there's other solutions. Again, I'm a little in a silo for missing some of the other ideas, so I apologize for that. A lot of things now are incredibly LAN aware to share information. A couple of FlexRadio tools like SliceMaster and FR Stack integrate beautifully with the radio on the LAN, and these don't all have to be running on the same computer. You could have a computer set up for your logging program, yet a whole different computer running your WSJTX. This is now part of this LAN-based or distributed, use, and so maybe you've got a favorite logging computer and it's a little hurting on processing power, because when you start doing digital modes, you need a bit more horsepower. You can actually do your decoding and sharing of information on a different computer and still update your logbook. In my case, when I run a remote station, but if I'm logging 2 meters at home, I have a way to, if I work a 2 meter DX station, to just log that call. And thanks to the features of WSJTX and JTDX, which is one of the 2 programs I use, it can send that log entry right to the logbook on the computer here at the cottage, which is running 7x24. And so that's really handy as well. And just, I go click on it, send it off to logbook of the world, and I'm done. So we're seeing more and more and more of this total station integration when we start to use the LAN or the Ethernet as the tool. So here's a bit of references, and there's many more. The FlexRadio community for our Flex customers is a great place to start. If you're not a Flex customer, you're still welcome to join and see what's going on. And FlexRadio, if you're interested in our radios, flexradio.com for the product set and line. And you can also reach out to sales at flexradio.com at any time if you want to learn more. We have the LAN and the Hamshack. It's a great video done by Dan N7HQ, which describes just how important the LAN and the Hamshack is. I mentioned the 403A Genius products, and then the link to the Node Red for station integration stuff, which I really like because it allows us to write a GUI, meaning a screen, or configure a station that may look like this beautiful thing that Dave WO2X did on the upper right, but it doesn't have to be that complicated. And by the way, we're all about getting this done and sharing our flows, and so you can get unlike hardware communicating with unlike hardware, stuff we have only dreamed about before. So that's pretty cool. So I've got a couple of short video clips here at the end where I show you a little bit more about how the LAN is used in my station. Now that you've seen part of our overview, or how you can start to consider LAN devices for controlling things, I'm actually at the base of my tower. My tower is a few feet that way, and my Hamshack is a lot of feet that way, or where all the RF equipment. And even though this is a remote station, this works incredibly well for any station, regardless how simple or complicated it is. But I actually pulled a LAN cable out here. It's, yes, in this mess of cables. And it shows you don't have to be that neat, although it's really good to present. This is reality for me. We have a little 5-port Ethernet switch here. We've got a 403A rotator controller right here. And we have a stepper. And I've also put a web switch here on the side that is from Hamtronics, and I use that to turn actually off the power to each one of these devices individually. The reason we want to do that is so that in case I have a debug something remotely, I want to know if it's causing noise or I need to reset it, I can turn the power off to my power supply here, this big Astron power supply for the antenna controller for the stepper, or I can turn it off for the rotator controller, just different switches. And this is just a wooden box. Yes, this sits out here in the winter, and it gets pretty cold here. This is Canada. So I have a cover that goes on top and some holes on it, and the power supply is certainly warm enough to keep it, or runs warm enough to keep the whole thing at a nice comfy temperature. Okay, here we are at the where the Hamshack is. I have a far more detailed video of this on my QRZ page at VA3MW, but you know, I don't, if you look up here at the top, we have a 8-port or 16-port switch, and most of those line connections have something to do with the Hamshack. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And the key part is we have Hamtronics switches to turn things off. They're on the LAN. We have, believe it or not, an LP100A, which is a US RS232 device. We've actually got software running in Node Red, which is a machine-to-machine communication tool, and that allows the watt meter to be read from even my iPhone while operating remotely. And we've converted most stuff to running remotely, or you know, to be able to see things on iPhones or desktops or whatever. And so there are ways to do that, but I'm just blown away. You know, I had to put a whole 16-port switch in here to take care of things. Now there's a few extra things, but a lot of it has something to do with controlling my station, from the radio to my amplifiers, actually to 2 radios, to the 403A antenna switch, and so you get the idea. So I wanted to thank you for joining me today for the QSO Today Expo, and I'd like to thank the organizers for allowing us to be part of it. And if you have any questions, you can reach us here, and hopefully this gives you some insight for the future of maybe how to redo or how to rebuild your Hamshack if you're looking at that in the future. 73 all, it's Mike, VA3, Mike Whiskey. Take care.